All right, well, thank you all for being here. I'm really excited today to be speaking with Qualcomm's Durga Mallardi. I think we can just start by setting the scene. Tell us what is Qualcomm doing in the AI space right now?
All right, so Qualcomm, we've been investing in AI for more than a decade now, more than 12 years, I would say. Of course, these days when we talk of AI, a lot of the real questions are on generative AI, so I'm going to specifically focus on that. We've been on a singular mission to bring generative AI running directly on devices. And what I mean by that is, it's a device that you and I can use. It can be a smartphone, a laptop, an XR glass, going all the way to your doorbell, your IoT devices, but running directly on the device itself, not necessarily tethered to the cloud. And the first question that usually people ask is why? Why do you want to run it on the device directly? And there's a lot of reasons for that. And so that's what we've been actually focusing on. The first one is performance. If you think of when originally a lot of interest started coming in on generative AI with chatbots and ChatGPT and so on, it's a question that you ask and you get an answer. But latency matters. You want the answer to come back very quickly, regardless of whether you have good connectivity or not. For all you know, you might be in airplane mode or in an airplane for that matter, and in which case you just want the answer to come back immediately. And that's something that's possible when you run these large models, whether they're language models or visual models running directly on device. So performance matters. The other one is personalization. A lot of the questions that we typically end up dealing with tend to be very contextual in nature. It's very specific to what you are asking. You might want to pick up your phone, point your camera in a certain direction and say, what building am I looking at? Well, that's a loaded question because it's not just a camera feed that you're looking at, but you need to know where you are. More importantly, which direction you're looking in. So in that sense, there's a context that's associated with that, and a little more subtle thing on top of that related to privacy and security, and that's like a topic in itself. The third part is if you just take a look at the sheer number of devices that are out there, we do believe that from an overall energy consumption and sustainability perspective, we do believe that the trajectory of generative AI is at the center of gravity of that gradually shifting more from the deep cloud towards the edge. That means closer and closer to the device in that sense. And so running it directly on device brings in a lot of benefits. Now, you asked the question, what are we doing in this space? So as we've been kind of talking through all of this, in the last maybe 1 year or so, we've spent an enormous amount of time in this is not just a pipe dream, but it's something that's commercial. You and I can go into a store and buy smartphones where you do have generative AI applications now running in a device itself. I'll give the most recent example of Live Translate. It's really if you haven't tried it, you should. I actually like it a lot. You and I can speak in 2 different languages. What you will hear is a translated version of my voice and my language back to you, and similarly the other way around. And one of the earlier speakers, Congressman Heard, when he was talking of movies, I don't know if you remember Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy, there's the Babelfish, which is the universal translator. This is like kind of in that direction, but it's a Live Translate is one of the applications that has come up. In addition to image editing, lots of tools associated with productivity and whatnot.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Do you think that we are at a place where we can trust tools like these entirely? I mean, would you use Live Translate today and trust it 100%?
I've tried it. It's a work in progress, but I actually like it quite a lot. In the sense that the translation capability is pretty remarkable, actually. We are running large language models in that, and it's not just one model, but we're talking of several models. At least one of them happens to be several billion parameters. So these are not small models that historically we associate in devices, but much larger models than that.
Got it. And the other 2 that you mentioned were performance and personalization. How does on-device AI impact user privacy and data security? And could you compare that to traditional cloud-based AI?
I think as a part of personalization, and I think privacy is one of the most important aspects that immediately comes to mind. There's a lot of data that you and I use on a daily basis, and we want to actually use that to get some answers, as an example, which are highly confidential and personal in nature. You might not be very comfortable uploading pictures of all your family pictures at the same time, and you might want to do a little bit of that directly on the device, any processing. Another example is where if you're using your work phone, for example, and there's company confidential information that's out there, you might or not always want that to be on the cloud. A third part could be more consumer-centric healthcare information. There's information that's sensitive, you want that to remain directly on the device itself. So privacy does matter. And it's not just about smartphones. If you actually take that example of company confidential information into laptops, increasingly we are beginning to see the workforce gradually going or making its way towards code generation. Enormous amount of software engineering workforce is being retrained and retooled in terms of how you can use AI to do code generation and use that as a starting point. Well, certainly that's one of those things where you don't want that to, or you'd rather prefer most of it running directly on the device in itself. So these are like examples of where privacy does matter. But a part of that also then involves, well, how do you make sure that things are indeed private? And there are a lot of important concepts that are done inside the device itself to make sure that things are secure. And as a part of that, we work very closely with even standards bodies in making sure that a lot of the encryption technology and is done in the right way in our devices.
So an important cybersecurity component there that you're pointing to. Let's talk about trying to get to a global harmonious AI policy framework. What are the challenges and opportunities there?
Yes, so all right, so let me actually give like I need to step back a bit in terms of the harmonious nature. But before we get to the harmonious nature, if you take a good look at the landscape of what is being conceived as AI regulations around the world, every region, every country has started thinking about what are the right set of guardrails to do. And from our vantage point, as we have been driving on-device generative AI, I also happen to be in the World Economic Forum AI Governance Alliance Steering Committee, and had the unique perspective and a privileged perspective of looking and listening to the different kinds of questions and concerns that come in. And the one thing that struck me over there is that on one hand, there is an incredible amount of enthusiasm for what AI can do in terms of uplifting economies in a dramatic way. It's like literally like a quantum leap in a lot of economies. So there's a lot of enthusiasm for that. And yet at the same time, there's wariness in terms of what are the right kind of guardrails. So that's like observation number one. The second observation is that we are at a stage in the technology where the last thing that we want to do is stifle innovation by overly burdening this technology with way too many regulations. So that is something well understood. It's not something that people are still grappling with. I think it is understood that it is indeed a promising technology and we have to put the right guardrails. But the other part that does come through is, as every region, every country is thinking about regulations, the last thing and now switching gears more from a technology standpoint and technology products, the last thing that we want is a highly disparate and fragmented set of regulations. It's very hard for those of us who are in the business of making technology and products to have global products that can go out there and literally have very different regulations in different regions. So the key is to have some sense of a common denominator, a common playbook that different regions will eventually work with. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has exactly the same regulations, but there is a common denominator which is a good starting point, and I believe that that's where the real balance is going to be. So it's a work in progress. We've started in our country ourselves. China started a way back, and Europe has already taken a head start as well. But other regions, and this is what I get to see in the Economic Forum, whether we have LATAM region or Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, a lot of the regions are looking up to see, okay, what are the right things that we need to do as well to make sure that we are putting the right regulations in place. And yet, there's enormous amount of optimism in terms of what generative AI can bring to the table in uplifting the economies.
In terms of striking the right balance on regulation and not over-regulating, where would you place the European Union on that, which, as you said, has been leading the way?
I think they're taking measured steps and listening certainly to a lot of the industry. And this is another place where it's very important to have the right kind of a public-private sector dialogue. The technology is evolving at a very rapid pace. And if you kind of think about it, even for those who are in the technology space, 2 years is an eternity in AI these days. And so if you just think in terms of the time cycle it takes for regulations to come in, by the time you start something, it might even be you might be constantly catching your own tail in some sense. And so the close cooperation between public and private sector is key. And the Europeans in that sense have certainly been listening to quite a few of us in terms of what we have to say on the technology.
There's a big global debate happening right now on large language models and whether they should be open or closed source. How should the government approach that question?
Yeah, so and this is, by the way, true not just for large language models, but large models in general. There's large language models, there's visual models and whatnot. And yeah, there's been historically a huge debate on should it be open or should it be closed. The shortest possible answer to that question is it has to be both. I don't think it's a binary choice between open versus closed, but let me explain why that is the case. So if you take a look at a large model, and we are specifically talking of these large models, these model parameters can go anywhere from like 1 billion parameters to more than 1 trillion parameters. And it takes enormous amount of resources to be able to train such models. It's not for the faint-hearted, it's not easy, it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources. Not everyone has access to those resources. And yet at the same time, I talked about the optimism behind developers in terms of generative AI applications. So what we do want to make sure at this stage is to have access to large models so developers can really thrive and innovate in that space, come out with applications that we can probably conceive of, but truth be told, at the end, I think we trust the community at large to come out with even more innovative applications in that space. So open source has that role of making sure that we have a very rich and vibrant ecosystem of developers who can build applications based upon these sort of large models which are open source. Now, on the other side, and this is important, on the other side, when we take a look at closed models, I talked about company confidential information before. There's a lot of data which is highly confidential, proprietary. You don't want models which are trained on that data to be available elsewhere, and there's lots of, even including within governments, there's lots of data, sensitive data. So there is a role for closed source models as well. They just happen to be in a different category in itself. So to come back to that short answer that I gave before, I don't think it's a binary answer. I think it needs to be both. And as a part of this debate, as Qualcomm, as we have been looking at these large models in devices, we have seen applications of both kinds of models.
So the government will need to thread that needle somehow and fund NAIR so that researchers can have access. Let's talk about content authenticity. It's such a big topic, especially in this election year. How is Qualcomm working with other industry players on this?
So right from the beginning of generative AI, we were kind of looking very carefully at how, let's start with images. Images, how do you differentiate between what is a real image and what is an image which is either derived from some other real image or simply generated all by itself? And as you can see, a lot of the images these days, when you begin to see, it's very hard to tell whether is it like AI generated or is it something that's real. So early on, we started working on a way to really verify the content and have the right kind of credentials that are kind of stamped on the image in itself. So we started working with partners on that. So content credentials is key. So any content that is either synthesized, directly synthesized, as in you write in a text and you see an image. One of the most famous models that's used for this these days is called Stable Diffusion. By the way, we have a demo downstairs if you want to see that. And the other one is where you have an existing image and you want to create a derivative image based upon that. I think downstairs there was a person, we took the picture of the Capitol and then Winter Wonderland. It looks really awesome. But it is based on an existing image, but then derived from there onwards. So the content credentials are stamped, rubber stamped right behind it, which means there is a seal of verification and it actually is proof. Is this real? Is it fully synthesized or is it based on a real image? And that is something that you actually get to see. So we worked with our partner TruePic in this and really proud to see some of the results coming out from there. I believe it's the world's first way of actually putting in a seal of verification that comes in with every single image. And this is not just about images. We're talking of images today. Tomorrow it's going to be with videos, wherein whether it's one way or the other. But we are doing our part in being responsible in terms of the way generative AI applications come on devices that you and I, consumer devices that you and I can use. And as a part of this, there's also an initiative within NIST. This is the AI, the consortium that is specifically associated with content verification and so on. It's called ASIC, and we are proud of our work in that space. It's an evolving set of regulations over there, but I hope that the work that we are doing is going to be critical to the way regulations eventually come out.
Yeah, could you expand on those regulations? What's the state of play there? What can we expect? I think the problem statement is well understood. Probably that's the best way of putting it. There's lots of solutions that are emerging in that space. If you kind of think about it right now within the industry, everyone has their own set of guardrails that they have put around themselves, including us. The act of standardization always is to put all of this together and then go from there onwards. It's early days in terms of a standardized set of regulations, but very happy to see NIST working closely with them in a listening mode right now, participating in the process, bring in your contributions. This goes all the way from content verification to safety-based regulations that will eventually come in. But I think it's early days in terms of the final set of regulations that we'll see. Got it. Okay, so we do have some time for audience questions if anyone would like to ask a question. Okay, we have one over here.
Hi there, I'm Ariana. I work at Equity Lab. We have a demo downstairs, and I'll be speaking later today. But it was fun to hear you call it TruePick. I know Munir from way back when. But I'm curious if you have thoughts on the consumer-facing side of authentication. So with something like, watermarking, if you're technical, maybe you can understand what those credentials look like and what that means. But for a consumer, how can they look at something and say, oh, this was AI generated, unless it's like a very clear imprint on it on an image, for example?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you take a look at it's a watermark in the sense that it's not something that is immediately visible on a picture. So let's say that it is indeed an AI generated image. You don't see something on the top that says AI generated image. What you end up doing in this case is, as you correctly pointed out, you click on it, and then you can actually see, okay, when it was taken or when it was generated, and that's the thing that's actually available. Our role in this entire ecosystem as Qualcomm is we provide all the necessary tools upon which then we can start bringing in something more that's immediately consumer facing. So we don't directly face the consumers ourselves. We work with our customers and partners. In this case, TruePick is a partner. The eventual customer might be a smartphone maker, a laptop maker, or a camera maker. They are the ones who will then, but we give them the right tool so that they can build on top of it. We are not the ones who finally interact with the customers ourselves.
Any other questions?
Questions are the best part.
Okay, in that case, we can wrap up early. Thank you so much, Durga, for your time.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you all.